What's up, everybody? Great to see you guys. Hey, my name is Mike. In case we haven't had a chance to meet, and I have the privilege of being on the teaching team here at Real Life, and I want to welcome our Discovery Campus, online campus. Those of you that might be seated outside or in the family room, or maybe you're joining us on Facebook tonight, we're grateful that you're with us as well. I got to tell you, I'm so excited about the 13 different Christmas services that are going to start this next week. So make sure you invite your friends and your family members and your neighbors and your coworkers and your classmates and your teammates, because it's going to be awesome. I don't know about you guys, I love Christmas. I love everything about it. I started listening to Christmas music the day after Thanksgiving. It's in my truck right now. I came in tonight singing Santa Baby on my way in. It was the last song I heard in my truck on the way in here. We decorate the day after Christmas. I love the lights. I love gift giving. I love the Christmas movies. I love cookies, especially. And I love the joy and excitement on kids' faces. I especially love the unique Christmas story. And if you're unfamiliar with the Christmas story, some guys that Rusty and I used to work with back in Kentucky years ago put this together. And you might have seen it because it's had like 56 million views on social media. But I just love the simplicity of kids joining in and trying to tell the Christmas story. Check this out.
An angel came to see Mary. She was doing laundry, and then the angel just appeared and she was really scared. So Gabriel was like, Mary, you're gonna have, I can't say it good. Mary, you're gonna have a baby. You're gonna have a baby, and you will call him Jesus. And then Mary was like, I'm not gonna have a baby yet. I'm only a teenager, I'm not married. Then the angel Gabriel told Joseph that Mary is not lying. You are having a new baby. And so they met up. They went to Bethlehem, which was Joseph's old town. They ride a donkey. I don't know. A camel. Oh yeah, a camel. She said, this donkey's fast. They tried to go to a hotel and they asked the keeper for a place to stay. The keeper said,
we have no rooms. Literally no rooms. So Mary and Joseph walked away sadly, but then he said,
the only place here in Bethlehem that you can stay is a stable. And then he just pointed the way and they followed. When the shepherds were taking care of the sheep,
then they saw angels.
The angel said, a new baby is getting born, who is King of the Jews.
The angel were singing, glorious.
And then the shepherds said, I think we should go there and meet him. The second, I think, said, yeah, I agree with you. And the other said, yeah, me too. They had to walk through a bunch of grass and bushes, maybe have to camp out a night. And then the wise men heard about it.
And then a star appeared.
We should probably follow that star. It's pointing down to the barn.
So maybe we should follow it. Maybe. So the wise men went to Jesus.
They gave them gifts.
A stuffed animal, like a hippo one, that I have at home.
Some diapers, and some wipes, and some milk, some shoes, some Jordans.
Gold ring and Latimer.
And I don't know how it would survive in that barn. Too stinky, too crowded, and ugh.
I think he probably pooped because the room was very smelly. Thank you for coming.
He's adorable.
He's gonna be our best friend.
I love you, and you the best baby I ever seen. There, I said it.
The new baby is gonna change the world.
And that is exactly the way it all went down. Now, it really is a story quite unlike any other. It's a story of hope entering the world. And could anybody use a little more hope these days? Well, this Christmas season, we have been kind of living here in a hope-filled prayer that is known as the Serenity Prayer. It's a prayer that many people have prayed before, have used to shape their own prayers. It's a prayer that many people in recovery have memorized and almost recited every day and find strength in that. It's actually a prayer that Debbie and I have on the wall at our home to remind us of that's what we need to be in our own life. The first week of this series, we learned to pray that first line, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. And Rusty talked about the peace that comes into our life when we stop fighting so hard to change a bunch of things that really aren't changeable things. And then last weekend, we talked about the courage to get after some things that actually can be changed. And we prayed, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change and the courage to change the things that I can. Now, if you missed either week, I'd really encourage you to get online and catch up with the series. But the thing about those two prayers that we've already said in the last 2 weeks is that they can leave us wondering, is this something that I just need to accept, or is this something that I need to change? I was thinking back to our Let It Go series back this fall. I talked about procrastination in that series. You might remember that. And my personality profile, the personality type, the way God has wired me up, is more of a spontaneous, creative, live in the moment feeler kind of person. That's just the way God put me together. And I just have to accept the fact that that is who I am. Now, on the other hand, I discovered that my disorganized, unscripted, cluttered, insecure, chaotic, procrastinating ways were, in fact, something I could change. So instead of me looking at my life and using my personality type as an excuse, saying, well, that's just who I am, everybody in my life just needs to accept it, I learned that I actually could make some proactive changes to the way I approach my days and start becoming God's best version of the guy He created within the framework of that personality type. Are you tracking with me here? So it's God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change and the courage to change the things that I can, and then today, and the wisdom to know the difference. The wisdom to know the difference. Like I said, we have been looking at the Christmas story along with this Serenity Prayer and some of the principal characters throughout this series. And since today we're talking about the wisdom to know the difference, can you guess who we might be talking about, one of the principal characters in the traditional Christmas story? Absolutely. We're talking about these guys right here. Those sometimes are referred to as we three kings, and we don't know if they were kings at all. But we do know this. They were wise men. Now, some have pondered what would have happened if there had been 3 wise women instead of 3 wise men. And they said they would have asked directions, first of all. They would have arrived on time. They would have helped deliver the baby, cleaned the stable, made a casserole, and brought some practical gifts, right? But I think these guys, these wise guys, just might be the most intriguing characters in the Christmas story. And I think that the wise men are in this story because they embody a basic wisdom decision that every human being has to face. So here's how the story goes. If you got a Bible, you got an app that you use for Scripture, we're going to put it on the screens as well. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 2, and this is how the story goes. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, as the kids said, in Judea during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men from eastern lands, probably somewhere in the Persian Empire, arrived in Jerusalem asking, "Where is the newborn king of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him." Well, King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, as was everyone in Jerusalem. He called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of religious law and asked, "Where is the Messiah supposed to be born?" He said, "Hey, scholars, I need some theological help. I don't really know the Scriptures. Could you fill me in on all the prophecies about the location of the promised Messiah's birthplace?" And they said, "Well, in Bethlehem in Judea. For For this is what the prophet wrote, "And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the ruling cities of Judah, for a ruler will come from you who will be the shepherd for my people Israel." So Herod's thinking, oh, a ruler, another king, going to be born in Bethlehem. And these guys have come looking for a king who's been born in Bethlehem. So Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them the time when the star first appeared. Then he told them, "You could do me a great favor if you would go to Bethlehem and search carefully for this child. And when you find him, come back and just tell me so I can go, and so I can go there and worship him too." You smell something sinister going on here? After this interview, the wise men went their way, and the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house, no longer in the stable. This was sometime after the birth of Jesus, and saw the child with his mother Mary. And they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasure chest and gave him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. When it was time to leave, they returned to their own country by another route, for God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. I got to stand in the remains of Herod's Palace a couple of years ago. We went on a trip to Israel. We shot a series there called The Road to Bethlehem. And I get to stand in what was called the main reception hall, where Herod would have met these wise men when they came. And I got to tell you, when I stood there in that reception hall in the ruins of Herod's Palace, it gave me chills. Honestly, it creeped me out a little bit. You see, King Herod was an extreme narcissist, and he built this expansive palace on this mountain with a 360-degree view of Judea. In fact, if you go there, you will see off in the distance a somewhat flat mountain very close by. Herod's architects and engineers told him that the view that he wanted could not be achieved on the particular mountain that he had chosen for his palace, so Herod had them move part of another mountain over to make his mountain even taller so he could have that view. And as I stood there looking at that palace and that flat mountain in the distance, I started thinking about how Jesus could have been teaching later, and he probably pointed to the mountain in the distance, said, "You see that up there? See what's going on up there? Herod's project? You see what that guy is doing? I tell you the truth. You're going to, by faith, you can do greater things. You could say to this mountain, move, and it will move." Herod lived in gross opulence while all the people suffered in poverty. Herod was married to over 10 women at the same time. He killed the only wife they said he really loved. He killed his mother-in-law, even killed 3 of his own sons, all to keep his throne secure. You see, there's a very stark contrast in this story. The wise men are looking for a king. Herod wanted to be king. In fact, the primary goal of Herod's life was to stay on his throne. In the little world that Herod was the master of the universe. And he had no intention of ever resigning, no intention of ever stepping down from the throne. Now, in reality, Herod was just a puppet king for the Romans. The Roman Empire was really in charge of the entire region. Herod just played his part as, quote unquote, king of the Jews. But he certainly liked playing that part. And he loved his title. So when he hears that somebody else is laying claim to that title, his title, you know there's going to be a problem. And there was. You may have heard about how when Herod realizes later that he has kind of been played by the wise men, they're not coming back to reveal the location of the child, he flies into a rage and orders all little boys 2 years of age and under to be eliminated because of the threat to his throne. It was horrible. It was tragic. You see, if you spend your life wanting to be the king, you will see everybody else as a threat to your kingdom. And your ego, my ego, will know no limits to stay on that throne. And gang, I'm not being melodramatic here at all. But it always ends up horrible and tragic. Always. See, here's the deal. If you want to be king, and somebody else, namely Jesus, comes along and claims to be king, one of you is going to have to give. You see, in everybody's life, there's only room for one king. And every life is a little bitty kingdom, and with every little kingdom comes a throne. So the question is, who's sitting on the throne of your life? Who's sitting on the throne of your life? Because I'm telling you from experience, there's a little Herod in all of us. I mean, I can tell you, I personally resisted for way too long the claim of a sovereign God who wanted to rule over my life. I wanted to be king. I wanted to call the shots. I wanted my ego to sit on that throne. I wanted to be master of the universe. In fact, I loved that title. But gang, truthfully, my resume for the position of king, it really sucks. Because when I try to play God, life becomes all about me. Therefore, I never serve other people, and thus I miss out on true joy. I start to walk into rooms thinking, here I am. Instead of walking into rooms going, oh, there you are. I get enslaved in my own desires. My insatiable appetites run rampant. I get addicted to approval and applause. I get deceitful. I exaggerate to impress people. I mess up, then I cover it up, and I count how many likes I get on social media. I get jealous of other people that have more than me. I devalue people. I use people. I manipulate relationships. That's pretty much been my track record as king of the universe, Mike Almighty. I used to be a whole lot like Herod, a whole lot more like him than those wise seekers were. Then I began to learn this truth. It says in Psalm 111, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. All who follow his precepts have good understanding. To him belongs eternal praise. I have learned that seeking after the real king and getting to know God's character and respecting his sovereign authority and trusting his unfailing love and surrendering to his incredible wise leadership, that's when true wisdom starts to rush into a person's life. I like the way Ellen Davis once put it. She says, the fear of God is the deeply sane recognition that we are not. Everyone that has ever been to AA or CR or some kind of 12-step program knows this Serenity Prayer that we've been talking about. And they also know that wise decisions about getting well were unable to be made until they stopped playing God. You see, when we finally let God be God, when we respect his authority and surrender to his love, when we start walking with him and letting him lead and start doing life his way, when we bow down and worship like these wise men did with exceedingly great joy, he begins to flood your life with wisdom and clear decision-making ability. He enables you to discern between what you need to accept and what you really need to change, which leads you to a whole new way of living. The same guy who wrote that the beginning of wisdom is the acknowledgement of God's greatness. He was also a king. His name was Solomon. He wrote most of the book of Proverbs. And when he was walking with God, he wrote all kinds of wisdom things like this one, a familiar verse to many of you where it says, trust in the Lord. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him as king, and he'll make your path straight. I love what it says in verse 7 and 8. It says, don't be impressed with your own wisdom. Instead, fear the Lord, respect the Lord, and turn away from evil. Then you'll have healing for your body and strength for your bones. And I love this, where he kind of equates wisdom to a woman and says, joyful is the person who finds wisdom, the one who gains understanding. For wisdom is more profitable than silver, and her wages are better than gold. Wisdom is more precious than rubies. Nothing you desire can compare with her. She offers you long life in her right hand and riches and honor in her left. She will guide you down delightful paths. All her ways are satisfying. Wisdom is a tree of life to those who embrace her. Happy are those who hold her tightly. My wife, Debbie, embraces that tree of life like few people I've ever seen in my life. And she loves the book of Proverbs, probably her favorite book in the entire Bible. And I would say that the pursuit of godly wisdom is why her character is so unbelievably attractive. I mean, she mentors all kinds of girls. They love to be around her. They love to learn from her. She's always mentoring somebody, having coffee with somebody. One night she had a bunch of college girls over at the house, and they chased me out. So I went next door to hang with my son Derek, who at the time lived next door to us. And after about 2 hours, I said to Derek, I said, "You think it's safe for me to go back home?" I looked over, and a ton of cars were still there. And Derek said, "Oh, that Debbie Breaux, crack for women." So yeah, she is. And I think that wisdom is the reason her life is the kind of life people look at and go, I want some of that. And Proverbs chapter 24, verse 3 and 4 is one of her favorite verses, and it says this: "By wisdom a house is built, and through understanding it's established. Through knowledge its rooms are filled with rare and beautiful treasures." And she would tell you that when Solomon wrote that, he wasn't talking about a palace on a hill with a 360 view. He was not talking about some grand reception hall filled with valuable antiques and priceless paintings. Not talking about an HGTV dream home with an open concept and granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. He was talking about lives that have the right king on the throne. Lives that are rich. Homes that ring with laughter and hearts that are full of joy and contentment and selflessness and generosity and kindness and love. People who finally have the wisdom they need to accept the things they cannot change, but to change the things that they really can. You see, I think the wise men are in this story because wisdom has to come to grips with, am I going to be king? Or am I going to look for a king? Am I going to continue to be the master of the universe? Or am I, in fact, going to resign and say, "God, I want you to come and take charge of my life"? The wise men give us that picture as they bow down and they worship the king. I think there's also another reason the wise men might be in this story. I think they give a very cool picture of God's heart for all people. I mean, I'm talking about people you would think that don't really belong in this story, much like the shepherds in the Christmas story. These guys are a picture of God's inclusivity, of God's acceptance, and God's grace. You ever been somewhere where you felt like, I just don't belong here? You ever felt like that? Ever feel such an outsider? I ran into an old friend about a month ago. I hadn't seen in a long time. Really cool guy, a great friend of mine. And we used to play a lot of softball together. We played in all kinds of tournaments every summer. And we went with this one particular tournament in a place that was, well, the best way I can put it is it was a very racist place. And my buddy was a different ethnicity. And we were sitting in the bleachers in between games. And this little boy was staring at my friend, just staring at him. He was probably 9 or 10 years old, had a big chaw of chewing tobacco in his cheek, this little boy. He looked at my buddy and said, "You ain't from around here, are you?" And we could hear like banjos from Deliverance playing. And my buddy goes, "Nope, I'm not. I'm not." We laughed about it about a month ago. Still remember how awkward that moment felt. Now, if you know a lot about like Bible stuff, then you know the Christmas story is basically a story for the people of Israel. Jesus himself was Jewish, and he lived in Israel among the people of Israel. And Matthew, who wrote what we just read, is primarily writing to a Jewish audience. And these wise men, they are outsiders. It says they were from the east. They're not talking about Boston or New York City, further east than that. That day probably meant Persia. We don't know for sure. But the thing we do know for sure, they are not a part of Israel. They don't have Hebrew scriptures. They don't obey the Torah. They don't go to temple. They don't worship the one true God. They don't belong. They ain't from around here, are they? Worse than all that, they're called Magi. The Greek word is magus, from which we get our word magician. These guys practiced astrology, constellations, horoscope-type mythology. And if you know anything about the Bible, then you know it stands in opposition to things like that, like astrology and fortune-telling and sorcery and witchcraft and dark magic kind of stuff. And the main reason the Bible is opposed to Magi-type practices was it was a form of idolatry. People ended up worshiping the cosmos. They looked to the universe for answers instead of the one who made the universe. And by the way, that's always a bad trade. In fact, every other use of the word magi in the New Testament is negative, except for this story. So here's what I think is so cool. Ironically, amazingly, God sends these magi a star. They're astrologers, and he meets them right where they are. He uses their false, misleading, superstitious, even idolatrous belief in astrology to lead them on a quest that brings them to Jesus. And I just think that's cool. And I just know that's God's love. These guys, ethnically, religiously, historically, morally, have no business in this Christmas story except for this. The story of Jesus is everyone is welcome. And no one is perfect. And anything is possible. Did you know that? Did you know that everyone is welcome? Including you? That nobody's perfect? Including you? And that anything's possible. For even you. Do you remember the message that the angels gave to those shepherds on the hillside? The angel said, I bring you good tidings of great joy that will be for all the people. Again, there's a stark contrast between them and King Herod. Herod was an insider. He had all the benefits of religion and heritage. He had the scriptures, he had the temple, he had the traditions, and he had pride and murder in his heart. These guys were total outsiders. They had no scripture, they had no temple, they had no religious tradition, but they had humility and worship in their hearts. And when they see Jesus, they rejoice with exceedingly great joy because it turns out that there is a God. And he's not out there in a constellation somewhere. He's personal. He's right here, right in front of us, wrapped in the vulnerability and poverty of a child. Emmanuel, God with us. And they are so moved, they fall to their knees and worship him. I believe that God still sends, quote unquote, the star to bring people like us to Jesus. I think the star happens anytime your life gets unexpectedly interrupted by something that sends you on a quest, something that jumpstarts an honest season of seeking and searching and wondering. And from my experience, that star could be some kind of major triumph or some kind of devastating failure. That star could be a breakup. It could be a separation, a divorce. That star could be the loss of a loved one. It could be the loss of a job. It might be an issue with one of your kids, or that scary report that came back from a biopsy, or that nagging sense of loneliness. And many of us have been exactly right there. And maybe that even describes a season that you are in right now, a season of seeking, where there's an emptiness and an ache and this knowingness that there's just something more. And that star, led you here today. And I know it sounds trite, and I know it sounds like bumper stickerish, but it's true. Wise men still seek him. Wise women do too. And you know what God says about people like that? If you will seek me with all your heart, you'll find me. If you're new around here, you need to know something about this church. Like those outsiders from the East, we didn't belong in this story either. In fact, this might be one of the largest collections of outcast and moral screw-ups living in Southern California. The secret about real life church is that we're just real people who desperately need God. You see, a bunch of us spent a lot of our lives trying to build our little kingdoms, moving this mountain over here, trying to impress everybody, building our own little self-centered empires. We felt threatened by anybody who might usurp our throne and our authority and take away the title that we loved. But it's a funny thing, because when we got to the point where we finally said, I don't want to be king, I can't do this anymore. I can't prop it up anymore. I can't pretend. I can't fake it. I can't try to look perfect anymore. God, I am a train wreck without you. I need you so badly. That's when life started to change for us. And wisdom came rushing in when we humbled ourselves and we bowed low before him and we finally got the right person on the throne. So let me just ask you, because I love you, who's sitting on the throne of your life? I just need to be really, really frank and honest with you. Just like me, you're not a good candidate for that job. You and I need someone much more qualified. We need someone stronger. We need someone better than us. We need someone bigger than us, someone wiser than us to sit on the throne of our life. And gang, when we let God be God, it's the beginning of the kind of wisdom that knows how to accept the things we can't change. And he gives us the power to change the things that we can. So I just want to give you a chance right now to resign. Step off the throne, lay down the crown, and like those guys, bow down and worship the one who laid down his divine rights and came as a vulnerable baby. I'm talking about the King, Jesus, the carpenter who grew up with his hands in wood and died with his hands in wood. The creator God who crucified his ego so that you and I could live forever. So I'm going to invite you to bow your heads right now. Let's just pray and talk to God about this. Father, I, first of all, just want to confess and apologize for all the different times in my life that I tried to sit on the throne and be the king of my little empire. As a result, made a wreck of my life. And I thank you that when I finally humbled myself and allowed you to be God and allowed you to be the king, that's when wisdom started to rush into my life. God, I know I'm not the only one in this place that can tell that story, because a bunch of us used to do that. We finally resigned and we stepped off the throne and we let you be God. And you began to change everything in our life. We began to have this serenity that there's some things we just can't change in this life. And then we began to have the courage to change the things that we could. And we had this divine wisdom showing us the difference in the two. God, we need you. And God, I pray right now that someone in this place is saying that from the bottom of their heart right now. They're saying, I'm tired of being king. I don't want to do this anymore. I need help. I want to seek after the true and living God. And God, I acknowledge that there's different kinds of quote-unquote stars that leads us to a search like that. But I thank you that it's led us here. I thank you that it's led us to Jesus. And I pray that someone would open their heart today and allow him to come in and be the king of their life. And I pray all this in Jesus' name.